Smart choices. Controller since launch and gradually to find some settings that work for you, because not every set of settings is going to work for every person. Everyone has different personal preferences. So things outside of controller settings do work the same on PC. Applies the same. Position is just personal preference. There's not a huge amount of difference between the two. I just leave that unstretched. The rest of these you don't really need to worry about. You're not going to want to turn off reload progress or damage direction. This interact reload behavior will cover that in controller settings, because you can actually change it in two different places, and obviously your Discord stuff doesn't matter. You're not going to want to turn off reload progress or damage direction. This interact reload behavior will cover that in controller settings, because you can actually change it in two different places, and obviously your Discord stuff doesn't matter. Graphics, you get very limited options on the console version. FOV, I would have up to max, maybe at 75. You think it's a bit wide, but I run that on max. Motion blur disabled. Idle energy saving. This just affects your frame rate and performance when in the menu, so it doesn't really matter at all. I've got it on disabled, but it doesn't really affect anything. For the audio tab, if you're playing on headphones, make sure you've got that set to headphones. Night mode, I'd have turned on. I find it slightly easier just to pick out sounds when it's on night mode. Hard to identify what exactly it's doing, but I'd rather have that on than off. Music during gameplay, I like having it on. If you have it off, you're going to hear a bit better, but the music's cool in this game, and I kind of like hearing it, particularly at the end of a raid when you get the intense kind of end game music playing when you're coming up to the timer running out and you've got to extract. I like having on, just personal preference. I'm crazy on recordings, and when I'm streaming, the gun sounds in this game are insanely loud, and then the background noises are really, really quiet. I find the audio balance in the game quite weird. I don't know if that's just me, but I have to have it down really, really low just so it works with the balance of everything else. You probably won't need to turn your master and effects down quite so low. One thing I would recommend looking at from this, though, is having your proxy voice chat volume up quite high. So this is when other players are talking in prox chat around you. If you have this up really high, then you're going to hear them better, and that's really useful if someone's saying something on prox chat, whether it's hostile or friendly. Going to make it easier to hear that. If you have this down low, you might not hear them saying that thing at all, and you might miss that there's a player nearby, and that could be really useful information for you. Voice chat is just the global setting for all voice chat, and then you have your party voice chat, your proximity voice chat. This raider voice thing is a kind of AI. Voice changer that you can use when you're talking to people through prox chat, if you want to use that, and then obviously subtitle settings.
Hey, Raider. go.
Our personal preference. Accessibility has some really useful settings that you might want to change in this. I'd recommend having a look through here. Here you can change the colorblind mode if you want to tweak that. That's going to change the blood color effect for you. I just have mine on default. I think that's fine. As well as your font size. Blocked line of fire. This is basically what's happening to your crosshair when your line of sight is blocked. So if I go over here and we aim over this way, you see when I get near this post, it's pulling my crosshair down to the right here. The dot is staying in the middle, but the crosshair is kind of moving over to the right, and that's showing that my gun is blocked by this. Because it's a third-person view, you're not looking exactly where your gun is going, you're kind of looking over the shoulder. So that's saying that if I fire that, it's just going to hit this thing, it's not going to go to the center there. If we change that setting and turn it off, then it's not going to move the crosshair when our line of sight is blocked, and that's actually going to be kind of annoying. So you see the crosshair is staying in the middle, even though my gun's pointing off to the side. And the actual dot from the middle moves away now, but the crosshair stays in the middle. So personally, I think the default setting for that is good. I don't think you need to change that. If you find it weird, you can change it so it's unsmooth. So this will mean it will just snap instantly. So you see what happens here. The crosshair is instantly snapping to the point where it's actually going to hit, rather than moving kind of smoothly between. So if you prefer that feel, then you might want to tweak that setting a little bit. So a really good one I'd recommend having a look at changing is crosshair under accessibility. You can change to override the crosshair shape. That's what I've done. And then you can select through all these different shapes here. So you've got cross, circle, T-cross, rounded diamond, angled radial lines. There's a whole bunch of different ones you can select. I like using cross. If you go back, there's angled radial lines as well. It's kind of nice. And you can adjust these so you have a uniform crosshair across all of your different guns. And then you can also change the color and the thickness and shape of this. So what we can do is make this either have a dot in the middle or not have a dot. We can change the radius of this dot. So you can make it a small dot or a large dot. I have mine on 4. I have my crosshair length on 20. That's when I move this left and right. You can see it's going to make that bigger and smaller. But keep in mind, when I zoom in with my gun, so this looks kind of small at the moment, but if I actually zoom in with my ferro, it's going to center into that. So they're actually pretty long there. We can't really make them much longer. And then if we go back to here, you can change the thickness of those lines. I have mine set on 2, and then you have the outline settings as well. So you can see there's a very thin black outline around that crosshair. I quite enjoyed that. It made it slightly easier to see against some of the different color backgrounds in the game, against the bright sky and stuff like that, and also in some of the darker areas too. Also have opacity set to 50, and then you can change the color of all this. So the first settings for the crosshair, that's the central color. I have this kind of cyan type color, I think works quite well. And then you can also change the outline, but just something that's going to contrast well. Controller sensitivity settings. So we're going to run through each of these. Aim assist,
Life is coming at you fast, and you're always having to fit more and more into it. The constant.
It's pretty self-explanatory. There's definitely an argument for having this off in this game. It's not a super strong aim assist when you're playing arK, and sometimes I find it a bit annoying because it kind of pulls towards the center mass, and that's annoying when you're fighting bots particularly. When you're shooting players, not such an issue when you just want to hit a shot perhaps, but when you're shooting arK and you want to hit their weak spots, sometimes it's a bit annoying because it's pulling towards the center mass and you want to shoot on the side like that and hit their weak points. I do have that left on though. Interact reload behavior, there's a few different settings for this that can be quite confusing. I think prioritized reload is the best, but there's an argument for a few different ones. What this basically means is that at the moment, if I fire off my Stitcher here and then I just need to tap X to reload, that'd be square if you're on PlayStation, so it's just a single tap, that's going to reload my gun. If I then go up to a container here, they're also single tap the same button to open a container. So using the same button there, and that'd be the same if I was interacting with the door, opening a container, whatever. And what this setting is doing is controlling how that button works when you have both those options available. So with prioritized reload, what's going to happen if I fire off my gun a little bit here, and then go over near one of these containers, you can see this circle icon in the middle. And what's basically going to happen is if I tap X in this situation, it's going to reload my gun instead of opening this container. And that's my priority. And then if I fire off the gun again, so we need to reload it, we go over here. You can see if I decide to hold down X, that's going to open the container without reloading my gun. If I had that set to prioritize interact, then in that same situation with my gun partially loaded here, when I was standing here, if I pressed X, that's going to interact with the container rather than reloading my weapon. So that could get you in trouble, or conversely, it could get you in trouble the other way. But personally, I wanted to reload my gun as a priority and then interact with other stuff. So I have that set to prioritize reload, but let me know what works for you down in the comments. I'd be interested to hear what different people are running on that setting. Invert vertical, invert Y, I have that on because I'm old and I'm weird. You don't need to have that on unless you're old and weird like me. Horizontal and vertical sends, I've turned these up a little bit from default. So these are basically controlling your free look. This is when you're just looking around like this. You're not ADSing, you're just looking around. Horizontal, you usually want to have a bit higher than vertical, right? Because your monitor is wider than it is tall. And so to keep it feeling smooth, you generally have your horizontal a little bit higher than your vertical. And then it feels kind of natural when you're looking up and down because you have a much smaller vertical axis to look up and down than you do horizontal. For me, that balance at 80-20 gives me a nice amount of freedom to look around whilst keeping it slow enough that you can control. That's kind of the dream, right? The quicker you move, the harder it is to lock onto targets. But with this speed, I feel like I can react and look around fairly well without it being out of control. What we then have after that is zoom sends multiplier and scoped zoom send.
Put the hand in there.
I didn't.
You sick?
I didn't. I said, can I have some? Didn't order some. I just want a little bit. Hold something out with your hand. This one. Okay.
Multiplier, you might often see these referred to as ADS multiplier or ADS sensitivity in other games. That's basically what this is. So zoom sense multiplier. This game, you're kind of looking over his shoulder, but this is my free look sends, and then when I go into this view, this is then that multiplier applied. So it's actually slowing down. So if I'm looking around quite quickly and then I zoom in, you can see it slows down drastically when I do that. That's that 25%. If we turn that setting right up, then you're going to see it go very, very fast when we aim down sights. You're going to see the effect of change there. Put it onto max just so you can see that as an example, and it's going to go absolutely crazy when we start looking around. So if you can play like this, then you're some sort of god gamer. So we'll pop that back on 25. The other one I have on 30, this is the scoped multiplier. So this is if you're using something with a scope, which there's really too much in the game. But if we chuck this Osprey on for a sec, that's going to affect the multiplier when you're looking down an actual proper scope like this. Next we have the look response curve. That is the sort of speed and acceleration that goes through your stick when you push it, when you interact with it.
I'm live.
Yeah.